Good evening. I think we'll go ahead and get started with tonight's program. Thank you so much for joining us as we host another CEAS lecture series sponsored by the University of Chicago's Center for East Asian Studies. My name is Susan Burns, and I'm a professor of history, East Asian language and civilizations in the college, and I'm also the director of UChicago's Center for East Asian Studies. Co-sponsored with the University of Chicago Library, this series was established in 2016 and provides students, faculties, and members of the university community an opportunity to interact with academics who are at the forefront of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean studies in the United States and abroad. For more information on the University of Chicago Center for East Asian Studies and the CEAS lecture series, as well as our co-sponsor, please follow the relevant links that will be provided in the chat box. I also encourage you to subscribe to receive weekly outreach emails to receive information pertaining to future events sponsored by our center. This link will be provided in the chat box. Now I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Melissa Van Wyck, who is Assistant Professor of Japanese Literature in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. Melissa will be introducing tonight's guest speaker and facilitating the program's Q&A following the end of the lecture. So Melissa, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, everyone, or morning or afternoon, where everyone is joining us from. I could not be more pleased to be presenting tonight's guest speaker, Dr. Laura Moretti, Professor of Early Modern Japanese Literature and Culture at the University of Cambridge and Fellow at Emmanuel College. Dr. Moretti's research on early modern Japanese popular culture and literature spans a diverse body of books and visual media from the 17th century through the 19th, and invites us to study Edo period books from within or on their own terms in ways that fundamentally challenge our understandings of literature. Dr. Moretti's first book, published by Brill in 2016, Recasting the Past and Early Modern Tales of Issei for Children, focuses on how a canonical text of Japanese court literature was remediated into a graphic narrative for children in the late 18th century. In the 1766 picture book, The Fashionable Issei, The Origins of Utagaruta. I think this book is a wonderful example of Dr. Moretti's ongoing commitment to recovering heretofore unresearched materials, making them accessible to new audiences, and bringing them to life with her masterful studies. Her most recent manuscript, Pleasure and Profit, Popular Prose in 17th Century Japan, released by Columbia University Press in 2020, has been named a 2021 Choice Outstanding Academic Title and was shortlisted for the 2021 DeLong Book History Prize. An invaluable study of a long-dismissed archive of 17th century print, which she refers to as the Great Unread. This archive and Dr. Moretti's study of it productively trouble long-held distinctions between the humorous and the didactic, the highbrow and the lowbrow, the literary and the non-literary, and of course, pleasure and profit. The first comprehensive study of the birth of Japanese commercial publishing, her monograph reevaluates books of popular prose as tools for knowledge-making, aesthetically and cognitively satisfying and engendering curiosity about the world in 17th century Japan. Dr. Moretti has also published a wide range of chapters and articles in both English and Japanese, most recently in two transmedial story worlds in early modern Japan, Issei Monogatari and The Quack Doctor, Chikusai, providing us with meaningful new ways to understand how these stories circulated across media and beyond the limited conceptual categories of the original and the derivative. This second project has also been itself recast into a Rakugo performance based on Chikusai's story by Rakugo master Tategawa Shinoharu, part of an ongoing collaboration between him and Dr. Moretti. And I was also very excited to see that there's a news article about that just came out from Kyoto News today. So I highly recommend everyone check that out after the talk today. I first got to know Dr. Moretti personally, as I suspect some of you here today did as well, through her summer school in early modern Japanese paleography at the University of Cambridge. And I don't want to wax too personal, but I do have very fond memories of Dr. Moretti reenacting eating etiquette manuals for us during the workshop, which I actually think is a really wonderful sort of encapsulation of how her work also invites us to engage with text in playful, practical, and embodied ways, just as their original readerships would have as well. Celebrating its milestone 10th anniversary this year, the program has now trained an absolutely amazing 300+ scholars during these years. The program has been instrumental in training a new generation of scholars in critical language and reading skills for early modern Japanese texts. And speaking personally, the program has also fostered an ever-growing but deeply connected international community of scholars working on pre-modern and early modern Japanese materials. I also very briefly want to promote to all of you the program's YouTube page, which houses a number of invaluable lectures, tutorials, and interviews of interest to anyone working on or curious about early modern Japanese texts, myself included. Dr. Moretti's new project, some of which I think she is so generously sharing with us today, investigates playful reading in a wide range of early modern materials, including graphic narratives and ephemera. It examines modes of reading that enable and encourage playful and active engagement, rewarding readers with both entertainment and insight. Riddles, puzzles, magic tricks, and invented scripts, to name just a few. With that, I'm very excited to turn the floor over to Dr. Moretti for her talk, When Reading Morphs into Play, Early Modern Japan and Ludic Literature.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for this very generous introduction. And thank you, Susan, and you all for having me today. It's really a great pleasure and an honor to be here. I hope I will not disappoint, which I will start by trying and share my screen without any hiccup. Here we are. I'd like to start with a question. How smart are you? Having lived in the UK for more than 12 years, every year I wait with trepidation the moment when at a Christmas party, I will be defeated by the usual Christmas cracker joke. Take this one, which has been voted the best topical joke in 2019 by The Guardian. Why does Donald Trump have his Christmas dinner on a plastic plate? The question, a puzzle or riddle really, is asked, and you find yourself racking your brain, desperate to find an answer. After all, no one is immune from the puzzle instinct, as Marcel Danesi calls it. When we're given a puzzle to solve, our mind sharpens and we set out to find a solution as if by instinct until we are satisfied, cathartically, we are said. So what is the answer? Why does Donald Trump have his Christmas dinner on a plastic plate? He does not get on with China. The joke is self-evident. You might groan or chuckle depending on your sense of humor, but one thing is certain for me. Every time I find myself doubting about the health of my mental agility. Testing mental agility. This is key to much of early modern Japanese play and ludic literature. Let's move away from my frustrating experience of British Christmas jokes and go back to 17th century Japan. We are in 1687, just when the publishing industry has been shaken up by the linguistic genius of Osaka writer Ihara Saikaku. Kyoto-based authors took on the challenge, including Nishimura Ichiroemon. Best known as a successful and incredibly well-networked publisher, Nishimura doubled up as a writer, and in 1687, he issued this book, Shin Chikusai, cashing in on the popularity of what at the time was a best-selling hit, The Quack Doctor Chikusai and its eponymous tale. Staging Chikusai's son, Junsai, and turning a wretched quack into a successful entertainer, Shin Chikusai gives readers with wit, wordplay, minimal parody, but also riddles and rebuses. Midway through the third volume, the protagonist's mental agility, as well as ours, is tested. A god counsels Junsai about what to do next in his life and does so via 3 riddles. The first reads as follows. Gaiki o nishi ni suteyo. Leave Gaiki to the west. It is solved by Junsai himself, the solution revealed to us by the narrator. The word Gaiki, which I have left untranslated on purpose here, and which is written in phonetic script, is synonym of seki, meaning cough. But seki, as cough, is homophonous of seki, one of the 54th station of the Tokaido Highway in the Kamigata region. So the answer is leave the place Seki to the west and go east, and Junsai will indeed move east to Edo. The same narrator then leaves us with a challenge. On purpose, I shall not reveal the solution to the last 2 riddles, so that it can become a bit of fun, nagusami, for the little ones. Find out the solution by yourself. all at a sudden, we are asked to leave behind the book that we are reading in order to engage with brain game. We are asked to appropriate the written text to pursue a cognitive, playful activity. The printed page becomes rather unexpectedly occupied by play. My current research project reconstructs what I provisionally call the ecology of playthings in early modern Japan, and I'm toying with an alternative title as Objects of Play in Early Modern Japan. I work at the intersection of literature, game studies, book history, and art history to explore how play occupied a fluid space within and without the printed page. As you can glance from the conceptual map that I've started drawing, I'm traversing a complex ecosystem where different species of play and games interact with each other in what takes the shape of a complex rhizomatic structure. This interconnected system of playthings breathes across media, with remediation playing key role. And ludic literature sprawls across this ecosystem, asking us to bring together printed material, genres, and audiences that are usually kept apart in traditional literary histories. My talk today zeroes in on a specific form of mental play, riddles, nazo-nazo in Japanese. Our journey starts by developing an understanding of how early modern Japanese riddles, nazo-nazo, worked. I reflect upon the nature of the play enabled by riddles across media, including on-stage performances, printed books that work as games, and board games. I then move on to exploring how riddles were appropriated by fictional narratives. I first introduce what I tentatively call bubbles of play, which interrupt the act of reading, enticing readers to turn into players and wrestle with mental play. After that, I head towards texts that display what I call the riddle logic. And in the process, I point to synergies with other forms of play, including mitate, the witty overlaying of images. At the end of this journey, our mind will be awakened to the cognitive power generated by bringing together two things which appear totally unrelated. So let's start our journey with one riddle. The Nihonbashi Bridge, wooden swords, people can't be cut down. This riddle is from Kyokun Nazo-nazo Haru no Yuki, a collection of 52 illustrated riddles compiled by Keisai Eisen and issued in 1845. Best known as an artist famous for his beauties and incredibly prolific in book illustration, Eisen was also invested in the production of playful material. Riddles and logical conundrums seem to be his forte, and Kyokun Nazo-nazo Haru no Yuki is among them. In his introduction to the book, Eisen explains how, in principle, a riddle, a nazo-nazo, works. The first component is the so-called kake, from the verb kakeru. You start with proposing one thing. Then follows the toki, from the verb toku. In answer to the kake, the toki comes out with something totally unrelated. The greater the gap between the kake and the toki, the better. In our example, the famous bridge known as Nihonbashi and wooden swords. The kokoro is the explanation of what brings together these two seemingly disconnected things. In the riddle introduced here, it is the verb kiru. In its potential form, kireru, and its two meanings. Associated with sword, it means to kill a person. But for a bridge, it means to be free from people. So wooden swords cannot kill people. The Nihonbashi cannot be free from people. Kireru koto ga nai. As a tangential remark, allow me to note how challenging it is to translate the kokoro in English, as it often, although not always, revolves around a pun. So the beauty of riddles lies in forging almost visionary associations, the kake and the toki. The mental process that is generated is not far from what Angus Fletcher discusses as the rule of yes and. We hear unforeseen and unforeseen pairing, a bridge and swords. We do not shout down this connection as simply nonsensically. We embrace it, yes, and we want to understand what makes the connection possible. That is the kokoro. In traditional riddles with roots in medieval Japan, the kokoro was not revealed. They were the so-called nidan nazo, two-layered riddles. But from the end of the 17th century, the kokoro started being provided, and we have the so-called sandan nazo, three-layered riddles. The kokoro is laid bare and becomes another layer of our mental play. I call it mental play, but what was the word used in early modern Japan? The word nagusami, which we have seen before in Shinchikusai, foregrounds the recreative dimension of riddles, a pastime for a moment of carefree entertainment. Children are often mentioned as players, although nothing precluded adults to engage with the same mental play. Eisen uses a different word, though. It's tawamure. He explains that tawamure tests one's mental agility. And Eisen uses various expressions to say the same thing. Tonchi o tamesu, saichi o tamesu, sai busai o shiru. They all point to the same, and what I wish to call testing mental agility. This is the crux of riddles. And to crack them, we need both nature and nurture. Eisen, in fact, points to both inborn sagacity, tonchi, and erudition, gakumon or hakugaku, to solve riddles. So the mental play that riddles enable was viewed as a form of tawamure as well as a type of nagusami. For me, it is mental play. While explaining how riddles work, Eisen is also very helpful in limning their history, which fleshes out the complexities of this form of play. After acknowledging their existence in both China and Japan, he identifies the Meiwa and Anei eras, so 1764-1781, as a time when riddles circulated in small booklets, conceived as play for children. And interestingly, he uses the word moteasobi here. And one aspect of my project is trying to reconstruct the terminology used in early modern Japan to talk about what we translate as play. Now, Eisen notes that in the Kyowa era, so at the beginning of the 19th century, riddles were repurposed in the realm of songs or hayariuta, thus presumably opening up more and more to adults and connected to the space of zashiki parties. In the Bunkai and Bunsei eras, up to the 1830s, riddles entered the space of extra-textual entertainment, turning into fully fledged performances, and Eisen mentions the riddle monk Shunsetsu. Let's pause on Eisen's account and delve into the complex landscape that he sketches. Riddles thrived across media, the printed word, songs, and performances, and these media could overlap. Let's take the case of Shunsetsu and start with on-stage performances. Sources seem to agree on the fact that the monk Shunsetsu started performing in the 10th month of 1815 in Okuyama, near the Asakusa Temple in Edo. Now, Okuyama was briefly reconstructed in 2015, and on the internet, on YouTube, you can find this intriguing video of how it would have looked like at the time. It's quite choppy, the video, for which I apologize, but I put also the link in case you want to go on YouTube and enjoy the space of Okuyama as reconstructed in 2015. But this was an area renowned for various entertainments and performances. Shunsetsu performed on stage as Nazo Nazo Haru no Yuki by Jipposha Ichimaru shows. He challenged his audience. Sa sa, okake nasai. Come on, throw me a riddle. 20th century scholar Suzuki Tozo, in his seminal research on Nazo Nazo, explains that the audience would advance only the kake. And Shunsetsu on stage would answer by providing both the toki and the kokoro. Early modern intellectual Ogawa Akimichi explains a little bit more in his 1814 Chirizuka Dan. The ticket for a performance was 16 koppemon, worth roughly a bowl of soba noodles at that point in time. I know that I would have gone to this performance rather than eating soba noodles, but that's me. Shunsetsu would have had a go at whatever riddle kake was thrown to him. In case he was unable to come up with an answer, and it's kokoro, he would gift the lucky person with a small present. That's why we see kettles, umbrellas, and the like on stage behind him. Shunsetsu's stage performance was a competitive game. An instance of agon would tell us game studies scholar Roger Caillois. Here, the point of the game is for Shunsetsu to show his superiority in displaying ingenuity and wit, what Ogawa Akimichi labels as saikaku and tonchi, in line with the language employed by Eisen. And to make things more impressive, all was done on the spot. Unfortunately, the collections of riddles associated to Shunsetsu's name, to which I will return shortly, give us the complete set: the kake, the toki, and the kokoro. But the example that we saw at the beginning from Shinchikusai gives an idea of how having just a kake would have operated. And I think that the 1728 collection titled Ushiro Himo, which predates Shunsetsu by almost a century, can still assist us in forming a better idea of the skills involved when being provided only with a kake. Here, for instance, we are given the following challenge. Umi no naka no kaeru, a frog in the middle of the sea. And the word frog is provided by means of the image of a frog working like a very simple visual rebus. Frog is kaeru, sea is umi. What do we make of it? We need to come up with something totally unrelated to the frog and yet somehow connected. This is what Shunsetsu would have done on stage. The brain cogs start moving. The solution that would have been given on stage is recorded in the second volume, and the answer to the riddle is ivy, sutta. How can a frog in the middle of the sea and ivy be connected? That's the kokoro. Umi needs to be separated in two words, u for rabbit and mi for snake. These are the two of the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac. In the middle is Tatsu, the dragon. Once we have Tatsu, we need to go back to the word kaeru. Forget the meaning of frog and retrieve its meaning as a verb, kaeru, to switch, to swap. We need to swap Tatsu. And when we do that, we do have Sutta, which is our ivy. Shunsetsu's audience would have admired the performer ability to come up with all this, to overlay two distant things, the frog in the middle of the sea provided by the audience and the ivy given in response by Shunsetsu. It seems to me, though, that the competitive aspect of the performance was not over once Shunsetsu had come up with a toki and a kokoro, as we have just done. At that point, the challenge was thrown back to the audience. As a member of the audience, I find myself asking, do I get all this? We remain in the realm of agon, it seems to me, almost in a match of mental table tennis. This agonistic performance was then remediated on the printed page. Eisen's Kyokun Nazo Nazo Haru no Yuki and Jipposha's Nazo Nazo Haru no Yuki collect the riddles complete with kake, toki, and kokoro that Shunsetsu had been able to solve, or at least this is what we are led to believe. At that point, there is no performance, and agon turns into another form of play. The readers of these books play a game of contrivance, battling with themselves, moved by a desire to solve the mental challenges recorded in these books. This is what game studies view as ludus, which is at the very heart of the definition of play given by philosopher Bernard Sweet. Playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. Now, the commercial publishing industry in early modern Japan recognized early on that there was a thriving market for what we might call texts as games. Riddles featured extensively in this type of ludic literature. These are the small booklets mentioned by Eisen. The oldest examples go back to the Kambun era, and our collections of Nidan Nazo, 2-layered riddles. The spare images that punctuate the Kambun era texts, so we're really second half of the 17th century, associate them with making merry, on the streets at New Year, and indoors by playing various games, including card games and board games. We find children engrossed in solving riddles. And this image points to the social dimension of this game. It can be done in groups as a moment of socialization. Ludus could even be turned into agon if the participants were playing against each other. Can I solve more riddles than anyone else in the party? The texts that went with these illustrations were simply lists or riddles, nothing else. Engaging with this text implies solely playing the game. Reading is playing. This literature is eminently ludic. The book is there almost as a prop to activate mental play, where the goal is to solve as many riddles as possible. Let's see how this works with two examples from Shin Kawari Nazozukushi, probably from the second half of the 17th century. Let's tackle our first riddle. Daikoku no onara, Daikoku's fart, fukube, a gourd. Again, two unrelated things are brought together. In solving this relatively easy riddle, we need to go through a fair amount of mental labor. The toki contains the word fuku, which is connected to Daikoku in the kake. Daikoku is the god of prosperity or fortune, fuku in Japanese. Following fuku is the sound he, here with the dakuten, so read as be. He is a synonym for the word fart, onara, which appears in the kake. So fukube is a gourd, but the sound carries also a second meaning, fortune's fart, and this second meaning is what brings together the kake and the toki. The type of mental labor involved in solving a riddle is not always the same, and that is part of the excitement of these collections of riddles. Take this other example from the same collection. Kone kaesu, to mix together thoroughly. Neko, a cat. I'm a cat lover, so I could not choose this one. Here, the solution involves taking the kake not as one word, which it is, but as two separate words, kone and kaesu. Kone has no meaning. It is just an empty sound, but kaesu does have a meaning, which is to turn upside down. So what happens when we turn upside down the word kone? It becomes neko, and there we have our cat. The thrill of engaging with this type of book is to keep testing one's sagacity, one riddle after the other. Succeeding in this mental challenge brings a moment of cathartic satisfaction, close to the eureka moment described in psychology in connection with the phenomenon of insight. Often laughter is mentioned in connection with these books, but there is very little laughter. It's really this moment of great satisfaction about one's mental achievement. Galvanized by our victory, we want more. And if we have not been able to solve a riddle, we still stubbornly go on in search for something that we can solve. And if this is a competitive game with other fellow players, then we certainly want to secure our triumph. Reading here is just a means to play. As part of the chapter that I'm currently writing, I'm mapping the various typologies of books of riddles that continue to be published well into the Meiji period. Some complicated the understanding of texts as games that emerge from most of the materials, and certainly from the material that I've just introduced to you. And today, I shall briefly mention Kewai Nazoyuki no Mizu to explain what I mean by this. Unfortunately, the only extant copy does not reveal much about its publication history. We might be able to place its publication around the middle of the 18th century, as the page layout reminds of early graphic narratives known in literary histories as early kusazoshi, produced around that time. Riddles, this time 3-layered riddles, remain the core of this book. As such, this is a text as game. However, it is designed in such a way as to also set in motion a form of storytelling. Let's see how. This double page spread presents two scenes divided by rocks in a visual composition widely employed in early kusazoshi. On the right is a visual trope that would have been immediately recognizable to any early modern reader. The love story of celebrated court lady and poet Ono no Komachi with high-ranking courtier Fukakusa no Shosho. When viewing this scene, the reader would have activated the memory of a story that was recounted in a variety of media at the time. Night after night, Fukakusa no Shosho visits Ono no Komachi, moved by the prospect of winning her heart and sharing a moment of intimacy with her on the 100th night. Alas, he dies on the 99th night. The text inscribed within the illustration is no narrative. It is a sandan nazo. Komachi's sash, snow in the depths of the mountain, it does not go away. Tokenikui. So we have two unrelated images, Komachi's sash, the snow. The kokoro explains what brings them together, the verb toku, followed by the word difficult, to tokenikui, connects with both a sash, the act of undoing a sash, hence sharing a moment of intimacy with a woman is not going to happen with Komachi. And with the snow, the act of the snow melting away. The text is designed for readers to play, but it also activates the memory of a story. Storytelling happens in some form in the memory of the reader who knows the story being referenced here. Let's shift to the left, the rest of the page. At the bottom is an Inari shrine. At the top left is a shop of second-hand garments. It is precisely where the kake and the toki of the riddle positions us. Praying to Inari, a shop of second-hand garments. What can possibly bring together these two unrelated things? The kokoro is revealed. Aka no mama oku. The use of logographic characters points to the meaning that this sentence has in the context of the second-hand shop. Things left unclean, aka no mama, are on display, oku. We are none wiser until we take the phonetic string of the Japanese and think about a homophone. Aka no mama is a word used for children to refer to rice with red beans, the rice that would normally be displayed, oku, at Inari Shrine during the festival of the Day of the Horse in the second month. The riddle is solved. But there is more text that we need to unpack. The human figures depicted here interact with each other by means of basic dialogue, as was often the case in early graphic narratives. This is no fully fledged narrative, yet there is enough on the page for the reader, in particular the reader familiar with these early graphic narratives, to create their own story out of the speech lines, if they so wish. Kewai Nazo Yuki no Mizu showcases how books of riddles could combine with other textual forms, while retaining play at the center of the engagement with the printed page. Can riddles be combined with other playthings then? What happens, for example, when riddles become part of a board game? And I see that Susan has a cat there. Try not to make her upside down. Okay, what happens with riddles in board games? Let me offer a preliminary answer by exploring Shimpan Warai Nazo Fukuro Tobimawari Sugoroku, issued in Kyoto by Kawashia Shushichi, possibly in 1811 or 1823. This is first and foremost a board game, possibly one of the most widely researched Japanese board games, known as E Sugoroku, pictorial Sugoroku, and similar to the European goose game, it is a competitive game that revolves around sheer luck. Players throw their dice and hope for the best to reach the goal first. We are in the realm of what Kaluwa names alea, and I quote, "It signifies and reveals the favor of destiny. The player is entirely passive. He does not deploy his resources, skill, muscles, or intelligence. All he needs to do is await in hope and trembling the cast of the die." End of the quote. So we start at the bottom right, where it says Furi Hajime. Depending on what comes out on our dice, we jump to different places on the board. Yet this pictorial Sugoroku is designed to complicate this game of dice. Alea is doubled up with ludus, with players enticed by a game of mental agility. Let's see how by playing. The dice gives us a number 2 and takes us to the square entitled Kadomatsu. As the image shows, this points to the typical upright New Year decoration with bamboo and pine tree leaves. This is precisely the theme of this pictorial Sugoroku. It is a parade of auspicious things and various actions associated with the new year. The board itself is drawn as if it was contained in the bag carried by Hote, one of the 7 lucky gods, and the word Fukuro in the title alludes to him. The square we have landed on contains a brief text. Erect, it's fine, but once down, it's of no use. What is it? The word nani, what is it, alerts us to the fact that we have been presented with the kake of a riddle. That is why the title includes the word nazo. On the surface, this poses no real challenge. Of course, the answer is Kadomatsu. The New Year's decoration is gorgeous when first put up, upright, as in the picture, but it is dreadful once it's taken down at the end of the season. This is hardly a riddle, though. As mentioned before many times, with the toki needs to give us something completely unrelated to the kake. Here, the toki provides the obvious answer to the question. There is no juxtaposition of 2 unrelated things, which is the requirement of a riddle. That is where our wit must come into play. I think we have to be a little bit naughty as well as witty. The clue of what to do lies in the word warai in the title. Here, warai is not used to mean laughter, but a word denoting sex. Let's go back to the riddle. Erect, it's fine, but once down, it's of no use. What is it? The answer should be fairly straightforward if you think about sexual intercourse that involves a man. At this juncture, 2 unrelated things, the New Year's decoration and a man's phallus, are brought together, overlaying in a moment of naughty incongruity. In this specific instance, the combination of pine, matsu, and bamboo, take, could lead to the word matsutake and be used as a double entendre. It was in fact part of a woman's dictionary to indicate a mushroom, matsutake, but also used as a metaphor for a phallus. Shinpan warai nazo fukuro tobi mawari sugoroku is a complex play space. It can be played just to get to the goal without lingering on any of the squares and the information they carry. Yet, it is purposefully designed to entice willing players to pause the dice game when landing on a square, taking time to engage with mental play. Understanding how the kake leads to the toki is just one component. The mental play required by this board game stretches nazo-nazo. The crux is getting the risque joke, conflating an auspicious image related to the new year with another image related to sex. A game of dice morphs into a prop that enables mental play, asking players to engage both in alea and ludus. There are other pictorial sugoroku that double up as collections of riddle, and the one you see on the slide is part of the materials that we will be reading for the 10th summer school in early modern Japanese paleography at Cambridge in August, because this year the theme is entertainment and entertainers in early modern Japan. Now, what happens when riddles are appropriated outside the realm of play? More to the point, what happens when riddles are appropriated by books conceived as fictional narratives? Let's move back to the 1687 Shinchikusai with which I started. As briefly mentioned at the outset, this is a fictional narrative that stages the adventures of Junsai, quack doctor turned witty jester. We read the 5 volumes moved by purposive curiosity. We are eager to know what happens to him. The text, however, is designed in such a way as to invite readers to pause the act of reading a story and to engage with mental play, in particular after the 3rd volume. And today I will discuss the first story of the 5th volume. The protagonist, that you can see on the left, Junsai, jots down a list of foods that are good and bad for the illness that a patient is suffering. This makes perfect sense within the narrative logic, and this is really Susan territory. There were lists of good and bad food for your ailment. It also works as an adaptation of fictional tropes established in previous texts. Yet I argue that the charm of this list lies elsewhere other than intertextuality. It lies in mental play. The list, in fact, is constructed as a medley of 2-layered riddles. The narrator refers to it as ponsaku, a text replete with quick wit. This list makes sense only to those who take up the invitation to play. Each item in the list is made of 2 components. The first is the kake, the second the toki. Let's tackle the first one. Appearance is the kake, sea bream is the toki. Why? Katachi, which is appearance, is written in phonetic script, means form or appearance. The meaning of appearance can be associated with a number of logographic characters, including this one. And the Sino-Japanese reading of this character is tai. Tai is also the reading for the homophonous character, meaning sea bream. Other cases employ techniques other than homophony. For example, what is the fish of the capital? This is an easy one. Whale. Why? Because the characters for whale is written combining the character for fish on the left and that of the capital on the right. These last examples point to synergies between riddles and playing with script. And I'm writing a whole chapter on how early modern materials appropriated and twisted the logic of writing in order to enable mental play. Shinchi-kusai is one among several texts that contain riddles in the form of what I very tentatively call bubbles of play. Please allow me to flesh out what I mean by this. These are texts designed in such a way that they invite readers to momentarily pause the purposive reading of a narrative and with it any immediate desire to see what happens next in the story in order to engage with play, mental play in the case of riddles. This is a discrete moment of play. It works almost like an interlude, a bubble of play. It can be short or long depending on the mental agility of the reader turned player. But reading, that is, reading a story, can and most likely will resume. After all, once we have solved the riddles, there is more narrative text there on the page for us to peruse. Engaging with play is by no means integral to the story and its development. The reader has indeed the prerogative to refuse the invitation to play and simply skip these bubbles of play. This choice has no repercussion on the understanding of the story. Yet, in doing so, we find ourselves ignoring a whole chunk of the text. It is only by taking up the invitation to play and the challenge of solving the riddles that the reader does full justice to the text as it has been designed by its creative team. Differently from books of riddles examined earlier on, it is no more a case of reading being play, but reading morphing temporarily into confined moments of play. What I call bubbles of play are by no means limited to riddles. Visual rebuses, hanjimono, and manual play are also ways in which the purposive reading of a story could be put on hold to momentarily engage with a form of play. Can play become integral to the reading experience, though? To answer this question, I shall discuss texts that display what I view as the riddle logic. Let me recap one important point before I move forward. Riddles work around a specific logic. Two things that have no apparent relationship are brought together. This combination unleashes mental play. We need to grasp what brings these two things together. In Nazo-Nazo, the link often lies in wordplay, but this is not a rule. Take, for example, the 7th month and the pipe I've just finished smoking. There is no immediately apparent relation, yet we're asked to connect them. How? It's hot. Let's work with this logic and investigate a page layout that was widely applied in early modern graphic narratives between 1798 and 1804. This is a double-page spread from Kyodensu Jurokurikan, the title of a three-volume graphic narrative written by popular author Santo Kyoden, probably illustrated by Kitao Shigemasa and issued in 1799. The rationale that underpins the whole volume is explained in the following page spread. It gives readers a twist on what are known as the 16 rakan, Juroku Rakan. Rakan, also known as Arhat, means the worthy one and feature in Buddhism as someone who has achieved enlightenment while listening to the Buddha. Normally, the name of the 16 Arhat contain the expression Sonja, meaning venerable. In Kyoden's book, the sound Sonja is retained, but for a completely different meaning. Sonja, where son refers to financial loss, so Sonja means loser. The 16 fake Arhat bear names that combine Sonja, loser, with a word that identifies the cause of losing money. Bonno, earthly desires, short temper, tanki, and much more, up to 60. This is mirrored in the title. The word rakan is subject to minimal parody and becomes rikan, where rikan means mirrors for profit. So on the surface, this graphic narrative is a collection of 16 scenes that advise on how to avoid financial loss and enhance one's profit. We might be tempted to readily dismiss this as a dull, didactic graphic narrative, typical of the post-1790 Kibyōshi. That is possibly why this text is absent from any research on graphic narrative that I could find, with the exception of brief mentions in Tanahashi Masahiro's work. I argue, however, that the didactic stance is a mere posture, a convenient veneer which conceals what the text actually asks the reader to do. That is, reading something that makes sense only if we play, wrestling with mental play, working within the logic typical of riddles. Let's work on this scene. It displays the page layout that characterizes every scene in the text, be it on half a folio or a double-page spread. On the upper right is a square that contains an image. Let's call it komae, taking a leaf from the language used by art historians for this type of visual element. The remaining of the visual field is occupied by another image. At first sight, these two images are unrelated. The man in the komae appears to be one of the fake Arhat. The man in the main visual field is a fisherman. The komae works as the kake, and the main visual field works as the toki. How do we make sense of this juxtaposition? This is the crux of the text, just like in riddles. And to find the solution of this conundrum, we are asked to engage with all the elements of the page, reading text and image, as would normally happen in a graphic narrative. The name of the fake Arhat contained the word shori daison, what in English would be penny wise, pound foolish. The fake Arhat is depicted holding a copper coin in his right hand, leaving on the floor a stash of 100 coins. It works as a visual translation of the teaching. Penny wise, pound foolish. So far, so good. But what about the fisherman? At the end of the line on the rod, floating in the air, is a tiny fish. Our fisherman is engrossed in his catch, oblivious of anything else. Let's now look at his left foot. It is pulled by what appears to be the claws of a kappa, a well-known water goblin. The fisherman is rejoicing about his tiny catch while being on the cusp of losing something far more precious, his own life. The teaching, penny wise, pound foolish, is stretched here, well beyond money. The verbal text provides more details in making sense of this puzzle. The first half of the narration confirms what the reader would have gathered from the illustration of the fake Arhat, spelling out the teaching to be retained. The second half does the same with the fisherman, confirming what brings together the two images. The speech lines, as normally in this kind of graphic narrative, add a layer of humor with wordplay crowning the episode. The kokoro of this riddle, what brings together the two images, is the teaching itself. Engaging with the many dimensions of the mental play encoded on this page is what makes reading meaningful and indeed enjoyable. The beauty of Kyoden's text is that each scene riffs on the same logic, but with subtle variation. Here, the Arhat is burning a letter. This is the kake. It is paired with a man beating a dog and accompanied by a woman. This is the toki. Bonno, earthly desires, is the kokoro. The letter works as a metaphor for the pleasure quarters, writing passionate love letters, often insincere rhetorical virtuosities, was part of the elaborate performance that a courtesan would play to keep a customer hooked. As such, the visual rendering of the kake positions us in the pleasure quarters. The first half of the verbal text explains that burning love letters means getting rid of one's earthly desires, and the reference to shikiyoku, lust, as what we must be aware of, reinforces the teaching: do not get lost in carnal desires. The image in the main visual field positions us during the night. The details of the text and image works as pieces of a mental jigsaw puzzle. Full enjoyment of the text can be achieved only by piecing together all the pieces on the printed page. The lantern that the woman carries is one piece. It comes with the word koi no yami, a common phrase that points to the loss of rational faculties when blinded by love. The choice of the night, which connects to the word yami, and the presence of headgears are new pieces of the puzzle. We are in the middle of a michiyuki, the couple having eloped together. Clearly, their relationship is illicit. And what awaits them is death, certainly a big loss. The expression bonno no inu, the dog of earthly desires, inscribed on the dog and also invoked in the verbal text, works around another saying, evil passions stick to you like a dog. Piecing all this together provides a fuller picture of this page. All starts with love letters, and if not dealt with promptly, love becomes an all-consuming obsession that leads to the loss of money, but also, and crucially, to the loss of life. Let me step back and reflect on what makes this text and its page layout. In his seminal work on Santo Kyoden, Koike Togoro calls this page layout as Taisho Zushi, compared images. Koike alludes to the fact that this is an example of mitate. Now, mitate is a complex and often debated concept. Traditionally, mitate refers to a technique whereby one thing is connected to another thing that pertains to a different variety. And these two things are brought together by some form of visual similarity. More recently, Iwata Hideyuki has narrowed the scope of mitate to materials that meet the following condition. The thing that appears in front of us evokes the image of a different thing that is not displayed. Think about the kadomatsu mentioned before. Iwata also suggests, in passing, that mitate, as he defines it, is akin to setting a riddle, nazokake. And the conceptual similarities between nazo-nazo and mitate has also been hinted at by Imano Shinji. For me, riddles and mitate are conceptual extensions of the same logic. Pairing two things unrelated and asking the reader, come viewer, come player, to work out how they can be related. In the case of mitate, this is normally visual similarity, and in the case of riddles as seen today, the link can be established thanks to homophony, but not only. Kyoden's work, analyzed here, embodies this logic and works as a complex puzzle. It is rooted in what I call the riddle logic by bringing together two unrelated images while offering a hint of what brings them together. Reading the text means engaging with this logic, grasping the kokoro. On top of this, we have seen that text and images work in tandem as a complex puzzle made of a number of pieces that the reader is asked to painstakingly put together. This is what makes the reading experience meaningful. And this is also what shows how exciting the text is. Beyond a rather uninspiring didactic surface, it challenges our mental agility. In my research, I'm mapping the complex network of graphic narratives that work around the same principle. The image that I've used in the publicity for this talk is from a kibyoushi by Kyokuté Bakin that employs the same riddle logics to repurpose a board game, and I will talk in depth about this at the end of May. My ultimate argument on this body of graphic narratives pushes against the prominence given to didacticism and reclaims play as the key to unlocking full the meaning and pleasures of these materials. They are ludic literature as well as didactic literature. Now, Kyodensu Juroku Rikan, which we have just seen, struck a chord with contemporary readers. First, it was reissued in 1815 by Edo publisher Maruya Kampachi under the title Juroku Rikan Ryaku Engi. And this is a revised new edition which loses the riddle logic explored in the Kibyoshi and conceives the Arhat as fully fledged protagonists of the texts. Furthermore, in 1840s, Utagawa Kuniyoshi gets inspiration from Kyoden's work in issuing the series of woodblock prints titled Myo Densu Juroku Rikan. The verbal text expands on the 1815 edition, but the overall composition puts a new spin on the riddle logic that was at the core of the 1799 edition. The riddle becomes more extreme, though, in Kuniyoshi's work. For example, Shori Daisonja is now depicted as someone blowing bubbles and associated to a beauty busy serving drinks and nibbles. How to link the two together? Well, that is where my research has just started. I think it is now time for me to conclude. Started with a silly British Christmas joke, our journey today has explored the multifarious spectrum of early modern Japanese ludic literature that plays with riddles from the 17th to the early 19th century. Designed for mental play only, collections of riddles bracket out the utilitarian referential functional language and turn words into toys. The reader is a comrade in play, their sole purpose being the solution of as many riddles as possible. Whether played on one's own as a form of ludus or against other players as a competitive game of agon, if played with mental dexterity, these texts as games lead to eureka moments where we savor the thrill of breakthrough thinking. Reading is playing. There is no story to follow, just the excitement of wrestling with cognitive conundrums. Along the way, we have explored how riddles were appropriated within fictional narratives. First, I have delved into texts that contain discrete invitations to mental play, bubbles of riddles, that ask readers to momentarily pause the act of reading a story and engage with mental play. I have also explored texts, more specifically late 18th century graphic narratives, that are built around what I have called the riddle logic. Their page layout works as a three-layered riddle, with text and image presenting other conundrums for the reader turned players to solve and piece together. Along the way, I have noted how riddles occupy a fluid space across a complex mediatic ecology. Collections of printed riddles in books and ephemera led to performances which then were remediated in the printed medium, and the printed medium could be employed in moments of social play. I have also pointed to the existence of complex play spaces where solving riddles doubles up with other games, in my example, games of dice. In all this, we have appreciated how the categories widely recognized in game studies, such as agon, ludus, and alea, must be viewed as a fuzzy set of categories that interact in complex symbiotic relations. Let me conclude by outlining the wider contributions that I hope this project will make. As mentioned at the outset, today's talk is part of an ongoing wider project that attempts to navigate the complex ecology of playthings as it developed in early modern Japan and explores various forms of ludic literature. Ultimately, I argue that critical engagement with these materials have the potential to expand our understanding of literature, reclaiming the place of play alongside other cherished concepts, including humor and intertextuality. In my writing, I distinguish ludic literature from what is known as gesaku, often translated as playful literature. The definition of gesaku remains slippery, and its temporal contours have been fiercely debated in Japanese language scholarship. What is generally acknowledged, though, is a propensity for wordplay, parody, and humor in writings imbued with what could be called the aesthetic of the inconsequential. As such, frivolous literature is another widespread translation for the term gesaku. This is no play, though. This is what Miguel Sicard calls playfulness, and playfulness is an attitude. Authors and readers, creators and consumers appropriate a context that is not created or intended for play. Ludic literature is not immune to a playful attitude, but it is designed to enable play as an activity. It allows playing a game. The forms of play and the types of game change according to the materials, and those explored today enable mental play. So my project as a whole delves into a wide range of play activities activated by different media. Working with ludic literature has also the potential to complicate our understanding of the very act of reading. It seems to me that the text examined today stretch the very idea of writerly text as developed by Roland Barthes. Whilst recognizing that any text requires some form of active participation for the meaning to be fully activated, I maintain that ludic literature asks a lot to its readers. Readers must first and foremost be willing to accept the invitation to play. Taking up this invitation can lead, almost paradoxically, to temporarily leave behind the book, pausing the act of reading the printed word in order to engage with play and its many dimensions. Failing to do so means failing to fully unlock what a text has to offer. In writing about board games, writer and critic Eric Thurm reminds us that if you don't think the way the game wants you to think, at least a little bit, you're not really playing the game at all. Much of early modern Japanese literature often asks us to think differently from what we are used to, grappling with logics and aesthetics often remove from what we expect when reading literature. So working with the ecology of playthings is my own way to play the game. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moretti, for that absolutely wonderful talk. I'd just like to remind everyone that for the Q&A, which we will start shortly, you can leave a question down in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'd also like to explain while you're all formulating your wonderful questions, that what we're going to be doing is, if you want me, I will just read out your question. That's fine. If you would like to read out your own question, please additionally use the raise hand function. And then I will call on you so that we can unmute you so that you will have a chance to read your own question. But please feel free to go ahead and start typing questions into the chat box. Maybe while we're waiting to do that, I have so many wonderful questions and ideas that I don't think are still quite solidified, but it resonates so interestingly for me with a lot of things that have come up in my scholarship about the invention and the way that invention is a form of play. So I'm thinking here specifically of Namiki Shoza, right, the playwright, right, who invents reinvents the revolving stage, and how he supposedly, there's this narrative, right, that he saw children playing with a spinning top, and that was the moment of eureka for him. Or even Takeda Izumo, of course, right, watching children play with sort of falling sand, and that being his inspiration for clocks, right, for a form of clock. So there seem to be so many rich areas of sort of interplay between the sort of ludic and forms of knowledge, and especially that moment of inspiration, even beyond sort of these texts. And I guess my one sort of question was, when I was listening to your talk initially, I was kind of waiting for image to come into it, because it seemed like so many of the texts that you were looking at early in your talk, the images were somewhat superfluous. Like the text would give you the information that the images would have otherwise given you. And then of course we shift to this really rich world of interplay between text, image, and riddle. But I'm wondering kind of if you could talk a little bit more in detail about that shift of sort of exactly when does that seem to be happening? How do we understand the sort of motivations behind that, and that shift from something that seems to be much more oral, auditory, even if it's imagining and envisioning of characters, but not necessarily visual about the actual information on the page, versus something that really requires you to think in those multiple three registers. Maybe we could just
Thank you.
there.
very much. I'll pick up first your comment because it's really very interesting. And actually, I think we should have a conversation because part of my project also looks at manual play. And in around 1810, there are a number of experiments of making books, taking a leaf from karakuri automata dolls and from the kabuki stage. In particular, the mention is to Ichikawa Danzo and his ability to shift. And you gave this wonderful talk at the AAS about other actors who do incredible things on stage. So taking inspiration from these two areas, as well as from toy prints that you need to cut and create into dioramas, you have an attempt to do that with books. And that is an area that I am exploring. And I'm thinking about, manual play. And again, there the questions are to what extent is just a spectacle of wonder, as I probably also was on the stage, and to what extent it becomes an integral part of how storytelling is done. So that's an area that I'm really interested in, and maybe we should get together for me to learn more from what happens on the kabuki stage. And again, this is the idea where everything is so much fluid and interconnected. That's why I quite like the idea of an ecosystem or ecology, even though I'm not sure that works very much. On your question about the images, that is really very interesting. I'm not sure whether there is a shift at a certain point in time, or whether there is more a shift when it comes to what kind of material. Because collections of riddles, which I see really as texts, as games, they continue to be produced from the second half of the 17th century well into the Meiji period. And as I said, I'm trying to really map all the various formats that are available, and a lot of them are illustrated. But again, it seems to me that the images very much give a visual image of what the thing is and don't do much more. Then why bothering having them? I'm still not clear about that. But as I said, I am trying to collect as many examples as possible, and that is something that I need to think more. So thank you for that. But I think that what is exciting for me is that not riddles as such, but the riddle logic gets integrated into graphic narratives. And when we talk about graphic narratives, when we talk about kusazoshi, as scholarship has already shown, we need to interact with the images. And we always say the images are there to co-create meaning. And I think that in this case, the juxtaposition of the two images is the crux, and we start from there to do everything else in the text. So it's more a matter of type of text. I always try not to use the word genre, but it's more a matter of textual typology, possibly, than what happens in time. But I will keep this question, whether there is a shift in time, because it would be interesting to see if collections of riddles done at the same time absorb elements of graphic narratives or not. So I'll keep thinking about that. Sorry, I don't have a question, but this is... I'm really excited that you ask questions and give comments where I can use to improve or look into my research further. So thank you very much.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for that. We'll definitely talk more. So I do want to move into some Q&A questions. The first is from Dan McKee. I'm assuming since I don't see your hand, I'm just going to go ahead and read out your question, if that's all right. So Dan McKee asks, as you beautifully described, ludic play breaks down fixed categories, finding unexpected connections between things that we assume to be completely different. In light of the fixed categories of Tokugawa social life, occupations, classes, genders, and so on, I wonder what you think are the political ramifications of riddles in the period. Are riddles necessarily subversive or a tool of resistance, more neutral? So how do you kind of configure that with the political?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm not a historian, but it seems to me that historians have done a lot of work to actually debunk this idea that the categories in Tokugawa social life were so fixed. But here I will bow to Susan's knowledge on this. This is a really interesting and difficult point. It seems to me that we're always very, how shall I put it? We seem always very eager, almost anxious to find a meaning in all this, to find, and being political and being politically subversive is something that is very much invoked even in the study of graphic narratives, for example, or kabuki theater, for example. But I wonder whether we always have to find a political ramification in something that perhaps was actually conceived as a form of nagusami. And perhaps the question that intrigues me is there a way that we can talk about the aesthetic of the inconsequential in a meaningful way? There is a great deal, I mean, I do understand that when it comes to Gesaku in particular, this idea of muda, of the inconsequential, of chakasu, make fun of things cannot be taken at face value. It was just a veneer for something that was actually very much involved with politics, etc. Was that necessarily the case? I do question that. So I'm not against trying to find whether there were political ramifications, but I actually don't think that that is what they were trying to do. And for me, it is more important to find a way to talk about what is not necessarily political, if it makes sense. So I'm not saying that it might not have ramifications, but I'm just saying that perhaps my primary sources don't really suggest that. But I will keep thinking about this. It is a very sensitive, actually, topic, I think.
So our next question is coming from Christoph Reichenbacher. It's good to see you again, Christoph, by the way.
Hello, Christoph.
Christoph says, thank you for your playful presentation. I wondered what could be said about the envisioned readership of the works that you presented. You showed how children played with grown-ups. However, some of the riddles and steps to solve the riddles seem to be exclusively targeting adults. Is there a genre especially for children, or do the works you showed include special sections for specific readership? So how are they sort of distinguished by anticipated readership?
Excellent question. Children are ubiquitously invoked in all these materials, as again, it was often for graphic narratives, and we are aware that we should take this as a sort of trope more than a face value sort of indication of what the readership was. So the majority of the riddle books books of riddles that I've seen come, not the majority, but a lot of them come with images that position children playing, doing nazo-nazo, with or without grown-ups. But we have also a lot of materials that are packaged with other materials that are clearly for grown-ups. I'm thinking about in the 1830s in Osaka, there was this delightful collection of very small size single sheet prints. It's called Naniwa Miyage, and it comes with a lot of materials that play with kabuki, that play with other materials that are clearly for grown-ups, and contains also riddle. For me, what was very interesting is to work on the board game that I showed to you with the risque jokes, because it seems to me, and sorry to trivialize it and bringing it back to the British context, but in Britain at Christmas, we have the panto. The panto is a fantastic, very foolish little performance. The audience is made of children and grown-ups, and at a certain point, there will always be jokes where the adults get the sexual meaning or the other meaning. Some are political jokes, some are sexual jokes, and the children just stay there, not really understanding what is going on. And I think that that was very much going on, certainly for the game board that I've shown. The Warai level was probably of entertainment for the grown-ups, and the rest was could be played with the children, and they would be oblivious of what was going on when the grown-ups would chuckle about what, you know, getting the second meaning. So I do think that we need to think again very in a fluid way. And probably they were targeting all sorts of ages and certainly all sorts of gender. There is no mention of gender ever in these materials. I hope I did answer.
Great. So our next question is from Chelsea Foxwell. She says, thank you for your excellent talk. I have 2 questions. It's wonderful that you covered such a broad span of time. Can you speak about any more sort of diachronic shifts that you might be seeing in these riddle books? And 2, as an art historian, I've read and thought a lot about mitate, and it seems that in many, although not all mitate, the play between ga and zoku, between past and present or high and low culture is central. So do we see the same type of play in the riddle, the nazo-nazo as well?
Excellent questions. Thank you very much. I start from the second. I'm glad that I've tried to propose this sort of similarity between the riddle logic and the logic of mitate for the first time today. So I'm really glad to have comments and suggestions. I don't think in the examples that I've seen so far that there is any interplay between ga and zoku, highbrow, lowbrow, past and present. But I will probably need to keep that in mind going forward. But then the question perhaps to you, Chelsea, if I may call you Chelsea, is to what extent mitate revolves around this dichotomy of ga, zoku, past and present, high and low culture. And because it seems to me that the way in which mitate is described, although I understand it's very much debated, is really this idea of bringing together 2 different images that normally shows a visual similarity. And Yatsushi, for example, or Furyu, I think Yatsushi mainly in the work of Alfred Haft is actually invoked when we move from ga to zoku to past and present and high and low. So I'm not even sure that actually that is not Yatsushi or it is mitate. Good news is that next week we are having Professor Sato Yukiko coming from Todai and giving a whole workshop on mitate to our students. I will be there eager to learn. So hopefully that I will get some more clarity. So mitate versus Yatsushi, I'm not sure entirely about that. About the diachronic shifts, I'm still working on that. The major problem I am encountering with riddles, is that some of them are digitized, some aren't. So I'm going finally, after 7 years, to Japan next month. So I have a number of archives where I will go and actually access a lot of these materials. The second problem is that they are difficult to make sense of. And so I must say, I will keep that in mind. I don't have an answer for you yet, but that is something that I need to keep thinking. And it also connects with what Melissa was saying about this. Is there a shift in time? Sorry, I cannot give more than this.
So we want to move to maybe a shorter, I don't know, maybe this won't be a shorter question, but I think this is a great one. From Tara McGowan. which says, could you explain
Hello.
could you explain why you chose the term bubble for the moment when play is introduced in the narrative text? I was also very curious about this term.
Okay.
And sort of what the investment is in that term and what other terms might be in play with that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
do you have any thoughts?
So I debated this for a long time with Richard Bowring, who is one of my, we're really gifted to have Richard Bowring here at Cambridge, and he's very, very clever when it comes to many things, including language and use of the language. At the beginning, I used the word pockets of play. The idea is that it has to be something confined. It's something that happens in a moment, and then you're meant to move on to the narrative. So you have a narrative story, you have this little pocket that you can open or not open. If you open it, you play with it, and then you move on. How to call it? I went with pocket first. I thought bubble, because a bubble is confined and normally not too big. And then it bursts, and then you go on. But probably it's not the best word. We also toyed with the idea, so I say we because Richard also mentioned interlude, which I quite like. But if you think about an interlude in a play, you probably go and have your ice cream and enjoy a chat, and really you don't do much. I don't know. And so I'm still thinking about that. But if you have something different than bubble, or pocket, I would be extremely eager to listen to that. Sorry, I don't know if I replied, Tara.
So with that, I'd like to move to a question from Fyodor Kubasov. So thank you for this insightful lecture. You have mentioned the monk who was competing with the audience and guessing the prize for the riddle that he couldn't solve, or giving a prize for the riddle he couldn't solve. My question is, were there any exercises besides the riddles themselves to develop that level of mental agility? So may it be connected with Buddhist practices such as Zen koan? So essentially, kind of what's the connection between learning these sort of different types of knowledge, the sort of inherent quick wit, then learning that one can have, like how's that develop?
Yes, so that's a very interesting question. Two things, perhaps. The first is that collections of riddles, and in particular the one by Eysen is wonderful because it has a lot of paratextual materials that talk about riddles, which is not always the case, could be framed as tools to develop your mental agility, your Saichi or Tonchi. Whether that was a posture or not, that's something to keep in mind. So in a way, collection of riddles were framed as a tool to improve one's mental agility. There are also collections which I think are called, but I could be wrong, Tawake Mondo. And they are made of, again, one question and an answer that don't somehow gel together at first sight. And they, as I just began looking into them, and they are somehow connected to Buddhism and Zen practices. And actually there were a couple of very interesting primary sources for sale by Hozuki Books in one of their fantastic late catalogs, which contained exactly these materials related to Zen. I also purchased a very strange little collection. It's Meiji 20, and it is this idea of connected to a Zen, fake Zen name, and it contains all sorts of playful things, including riddles, but also fake characters, are a little bit like the Ono no Bakamura fake textbook. So there is a connection, it seems to me, with Zen. With koan, I actually had this conversation again with Richard Bowring, and it seems to me that koan actually asks us to realize that language is not there for us to gain enlightenment. So I think they do something a little bit different. But certainly there are materials that are connected to Buddhism. I hope I answered. I'm not sure.
I just very quickly want to add that Tara has suggested cul-de-sac as a replacement for bubble for your kind consideration.
Okay, thank you. I would jot down.
And with that, I'd like to move to a question from Nancy Hamilton, who asks,
Hi, Nancy.
Who asks, so much Edo literature seems to hinge on wordplay and mitate. I wonder if there's a point at which the boundary between reading and play becomes so completely blurred as to be inseparable. So in this world where it seems like play and mitate is everywhere, how do we distinguish if we do it all?
That's a very good question. And I think, again, it depends from text to text. I mean, Pleasure in Profit was nothing plain, nothing wordplay, not even remotely. So I think it really depends on the texts. And so take, for example, graphic narratives. Kibyōshi yellow cover books really work very much around this idea of wordplay. And certainly the speech lines, the majority of them revolve around some form of wordplay, and that's the point of it. And either you get it or you don't get it. So again, it is really engaging our mental agility. But then if you go into later Gokan, the longer graphic narratives, there is nothing or very little of this. So it seems to me that I'm always very wary of generalizing. I don't like that in my research. So I will never be able to make an argument of this is what early modern literature is. Absolutely not. There was much more that was very different from this. But the materials that this project looks at certainly do what you say, and that is why I think they problematize also the act of reading. Is it reading or is it something else? So I hope I answered. Yes.
So I think we maybe have time for one quick question, and then we'll have to wrap up. But I just want to remind everyone that we will direct any unanswered questions, because we do have a bit of a queue. We will direct them to Dr. Moretti. So if you want to add something in, we're not going to have time to, please feel free to do that. So with that, I'd like to turn to Maria Tsoi's question. Hi, Maria. She says, Dear Dr. Moretti, thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. You touched upon riddle books as books for children. Are these riddles aimed at testing mental agility? Are they riddles that are used specifically for educational purposes? So are they understood as sort of a learning device in that time?
Yeah, I think it connects also with the question, with one of the previous questions. They were framed also as a learning device. But again, we have to think that these publishers needed to sell these books. And so to what extent that frame allows to make the book more appealing, because if you buy this, you not only enjoy, but you also learn, or whether actually that was a way to form your mental agility. I think that in my project, I'm trying to do more readings about psychology. There is a great deal around the insight and this idea of how the insight works and how it affects your brain. There is a great deal of literature on learning via play, and that is something that I've started doing reading with, and certainly might be helpful to understand whether framing this text as also educational was genuine or was just a sort of veneer. So thank you. I need to keep thinking about that.
So with that, we are most unfortunately out of time. But I want to thank again so much Dr. Moretti for this wonderful talk and for joining us, for all of you joining us this evening. We really hope that you enjoyed tonight's program. Please note that today's lecture has been recorded and will be posted on the SEAS YouTube channel once it is published for public viewing. In-person lectures that are part of this series are also recorded with the authorization of the speaker. If you are interested in receiving information on upcoming events and to learn more about the resources that the UChicago Center for East Asian Studies offers, please be sure to subscribe to the center's listserv. The link to this, as well as the link to the SEAS YouTube channel, will be made available in the chat box. I think I can already see them there, where you may also view past SEAS lecture talks. So once again, thank you all so much for attending tonight's program, and we wish you all a wonderful rest of the evening, morning, or day.
Thank you very much for joining. Thank you. Thank you for all your comments and ideas. Thank you.